Good afternoon, I'm Andy Hodges and welcome to The National Purse, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to our virtual discussion this afternoon, ZIMCODD Public Finance Management Reform Indaba, implications of the 2019 Office of the Auditor General OAG findings on social and economic justice. This program is brought to you by ZimPaper's TV network ZTN in partnership with the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Now please feel free to share your comments and views via our Facebook page, ZimPaper's TV network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. Public sector auditing remains a foundation for the realization of good public finance management in particular and sound public sector governance in general. Through conducting factual and unbiased assessment of the public sector financial statements, public auditors, especially supreme audit institutions, as Office of the Auditor General, assist public entities and other constitutional entities to promote good governance, public accountability, transparency, integrity, efficiency and effectiveness in all matters and decisions involving public funds. Above all, public sector auditing plays a crucial role in ascertaining whether public funds are being utilized for the attainment of set goals and objectives. To discuss ZIMCODD Public Finance Management Reform Indaba, implications of the 2019 Office of the Auditor General OAG findings on social and economic justice, we are joined virtually this afternoon by Judith Cowlem. She's Executive Director at the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust. Pepekai Chivore, Director in the Parliament of Zimbabwe's Budget Office. Dr. Vincent Chakunda, Senior Lecturer, Local Governance Studies at Midland State University, MSU. And Dr. Prosper Chitambara, Senior Economist at Ledgers. I welcome you all to the show this afternoon. Vincent, I'd like to start with you. Your views, Vincent, are there any exceptions highlighted in the OAG report that you would like to comment on? Is the OAG's report, in your view, important in monitoring and ensuring social and economic justice for Zimbabwean citizens? And if so, why? Vincent? I think you may have to unmute your microphone, please, Vincent. Okay, we'll try and get Vincent on the line. It seems we seem to have lost him due to the connection. All right, Judith, let me come to you then. So, Judith, what from the OAG's 2019 report did you note, and can you highlight as it pertains to findings, especially on local authorities, ministries and parastatals, which have a bearing on social and economic justice issues and reduce, as it is alleged, public service delivery? Judith?
Thank you very much, Andy, for having me, and good afternoon, listeners. I think, and really the bottom line is public resource. The Auditor General's report is just pointing out that public resources are generally not effectively and efficiently used for the benefit of all citizens. And she brings this out in several ways. To start with, we see that this report is coming at a time when even the COVID-19 itself has put a spotlight on the widening and deepening socioeconomic hardships that citizens are facing. We see that our public services are in deplorable state, and the report points to worrying activities. And what is painful is that most of the hardships are really man-made, as per this report, which highlights, for example, poor corporate governance, as shown by the failure by the Treasury to adhere to legal provisions on sanctioning of excess expenditure. The report also points to diversion of resources, and she gives an example of the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, where priority was given to purchasing a pool car as compared to supporting programs in institutions of higher learning, which would have benefited many students. And we know most of these students come from very poor families, so they go into these public institutions. So the prioritization there in terms of diversion of resources. The report also highlights financial irregularities, where payments are made without authorization. And this is worrying because it points to a huge potential for corruption, which only then benefits a few individuals and not the rest of the citizens. And it's an injustice in that regard. The other thing, Andy, is about, okay, let me just finish on the other thing on the health sector, where the report points that of a budget that was made, only 1% was given, whereas that budget could have met needs such as purchase of ambulances, medications, and whatever. So the lack of commitment to support such a public service sector like health is also worrying. I know you wanted to interrupt me, Eddie.
No, I just wanted to ask you, funnily enough, you went on to health, because I realized the Herald was reporting that the Auditor General before Parliament also spoke about the alleged misappropriation in terms of buying COVID supplies. And of course, that does affect social programs, because of course, we really need those COVID supplies as a nation, because we are one of the top nations in terms of getting out the vaccine. Judith?
So what's your question, Andy?
I was just saying that the report also highlights the alleged misappropriation in terms of purchasing COVID, which, as you talked about health, that does have an impact, of course, on social programs for citizens.
Exactly, that's right. And we are saying it's almost beats into the hand that, yes, these positives, where we are saying the country is an exemplary, especially in the region, in terms of even access to COVID, and yet you see mismanagement and corruption happening where all citizens should benefit. So the report just goes on to highlight and make more evident the importance of ensuring that such sectors as health, where majority of citizens, especially now when we know not many can afford a private service, right, health services. Right. If somebody then diverts, so it's a huge issue, and you are right. The COVID highlights actually just go on to try and exacerbate that situation that is bad, that is highlighted in this report.
All right, thank you, Judith. Vincent, I'm not sure if you're with us now. Vincent, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Vincent, okay, let me ask you before I move on to Prosper. Vincent, what are your views? You've heard, I'm sure you heard Judith there giving us some of her highlights that she saw in the OAG's report. So what about your views? Are there any exceptions in the OAG's report that you would like to highlight? And of course, is the OAG's report, in your view, important in monitoring and ensuring social and economic justice for Zimbabwean citizens? And just like I asked Judith, if it is, why?
The better part of Judith's analysis, and I'm not going to base my comment on what Judith said. Why? Because I only joined later. I was struggling with the network. But what I would say is there is a serious problem with the management of public resources in this country, as evidenced by the level of abuse of the resources, which brings citizens to conclude that government is actually collecting in order to chew. Because the bulk of the resources that are being generated by government are actually going down the drain, being abused by public officials whose appetite for abusing these public resources actually is so serious. So we have a serious problem. And also just a small comment on the extent to which the recommendations are being implemented, those coming from the previous Auditor General's report. The implementation is very poor across all public sector entities, just to be general. And there are a number of reasons probably that I may share with you later in relation to why I think there is such low implementation of the Auditor General's recommendations. So we have a problem of abuse, and that cannot be contested. Again, if you are to look at the major areas of abuse of public resources from the 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, you find they are almost the same. Like a case with the Mutare City Council, wherein a purchase is made, 8 years later, the delivery is yet to be accounted for. The same actually happened with the ZPC at some point. When they purchased transformers, it's in the 2018 report now, from Pizzo Investment, that the delivery was yet to be made by end of 2018. So we have serious problem with abuse, and the modus operandi is actually the same. Probably we must begin to talk of the mutation of this gene of corruption in terms of how it is actually not per se changing complexion, but actually increasing magnitude on the same furrow.
Right, right. Prosper, I want to ask you, because looking at the OAG report from an holistic level, I mean, you heard there what Vincent said. What inferences do you make from the exceptions that were highlighted, particularly, as I said, to local authorities, ministries, and parastatals? What was the core theme, in your opinion, running throughout the report?
Thank you so much, Andy. I think, like my esteemed panelists have said, the thread and the core theme hasn't really changed over the past few years. I think the broader issues are to do with the governance, for example, with respect to payments that are made without approval, without adequate approval, without supporting documentation. Also, with respect to governance, you look at issues of ineffective internal control systems across government ministries and parastatals. And when you look at parastatals in terms of governance, an issue that has come out quite strongly is the unbalanced composition of boards. And in some cases, parastatals have gone for a long period of time without boards. Then again, some boards appear themselves texts that are actually not approved by the ministry. Then another key issue that has come out is to do with the challenges with respect to revenue collections. The Auditor General has noted that some government ministries have not been collecting revenues for a long period of time. Then she has also highlighted issues around employment-related challenges. A number of government ministries have not been carrying out reconciliations on their pay sheet, and obviously that creates challenges with respect to the payment being made to people that are not supposed to be paid. And last but not least, the issue of procurement, I think it has continued to come out quite strongly in the reports over the past few years.
Right.
So I would say those are the four key themes or threads that continue to, I think, be dominant and topical in this report.
Thank you, Prosper. Pepukai, you know, commentators, I'm going to ask you a two-part question here. Commentators state that the leakages and exceptions highlighted in the OAG's report in most cases means that much needed revenue is lost to the government, or that money earmarked by the government for specific programs and projects is not spent as intended. So as I said, two-part comment. First of all, could you comment on that issue? But the second question I want to ask you, of course, is that with the alleged misappropriation or misuse of funds, as highlighted in OAG's report, I mean, what impact does that have, in your opinion, on achieving social and economic justice for Zimbabwean citizens? Pepukai?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. We have noted cases of misuse or abuse of resources, and that has an implication of prejudicing government of the much needed resources, or prejudicing some service areas of the much needed resources. For example, I've read the Auditor General report on Parenyato Hospital, where a number, almost 2,000 of operations were cancelled due to non-functional hospital equipment. So you find that such is the implication on the socio-economic rights of the citizens. So the implications on there are various implications, especially on service delivery, as they relate to the rights of the citizens. If you check for the reports for the local authorities, you realize that cities like Masvingo, Marondera, there are issues of inadequate water provision. So that has an implication on the right or to access water for the citizens. Cities like Bindura, for example, and Chinoy, there are some areas or locations without potable water. So that again has an implication on service delivery. Cities like Chegutu or Chiredzi, where there are non-functional water meters, more than or at least 80% of the citizens had non-functional water meters. So again, that has an implication on citizens then being made to pay estimates of water rather than the actuals. Again, that is the implication of socio-economic rights of the citizens. So you going across all these Auditor General reports, then you realize that there are various implications on socio-economic rights of the citizens, and that doesn't even stop at these 4 reports that were recently tabled. You need to look at even the special audit reports that were tabled. There was a special audit report on value for money, on registration, supervision, and monitoring of schools, where various other issues were raised by the Auditor General with regards to the unfavorable environment in which our students are learning in, as well as inadequacy of teaching and learning materials. There was also the report that was recently tabled on the cyclone Idai response, where we saw cases of misuse of the resources that were donated being highlighted in the Auditor General report, as well as the lack of disaster preparedness. All that is implication on the socio-economic rights of citizens as enshrined in the Bill of Rights in Chapter 4 of the Constitution.
Right. Thank you, Pepukai. Judith, I'll ask you to be brief, but from a CSO's perspective, you heard Pepukai's reasonings there about how the Auditor General's report has an impact on social and economic justice for citizens. So what is your view? What is the impact on Zimbabwean citizens caused by some of the alleged exceptions as highlighted in the OAG's report?
Thank you, Andy. I think we know that it is government's primary obligation to meet the needs of the citizens. But for example, the OG's report has highlighted even huge amounts of expired drugs at some provincial hospitals. And one wonders how that happens, because either it speaks to irregularities with regards to procurement, where more drugs are purchased and are not used, or just negligence and incompetence, where citizens who would have wanted those drugs were denied access to them. But from a civil society perspective, what the report is highlighting are gaps in terms of government meeting the obligations in terms of delivery of services. And civil society, in addition to our watchdog role, civil society also comes in to complement those government efforts by service provision in most areas across the country. But for CSOs to do that, indeed, the operating environment has to be conducive and supportive of CSOs' work. But what we see now, for example, we see that operating environment is shrinking at a fast rate. I'm sure we are all aware of the threats that have been put towards banning certain civil society organizations. So that will then have implications for our ability to complement government efforts. And as a result, citizens will be made more vulnerable because nobody then comes in to step in to fill in this gap that has been created by the malpractices that have been highlighted in this report.
Right. Thank you, Judith. You're watching our virtual discussion this afternoon. ZIMCODD Public Finance Management Reform Indaba, implications of the 2019 Office of the Auditor General OAG's findings on social and economic justice. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Prosper, the OAG's 2019 report states, I'm going to throw a few numbers at you, that excess expenditure of $6.8 billion arose from unallocated reserve transfers made to line ministries, amounting to $7.3 billion, that exceeded the approved budget of $580 million in violation of Section 3055 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Amendment Number 2 Act of 2013. So what's your comment on this? Prosper, I mean, the question I think is, how is this able to occur? And what is your further comment on non-adherence by the Treasury to legal provisions on the sanctioning of excess expenditure by Parliament?
Thank you, Andy. No, I think it's quite shocking and quite disappointing, probably, coming from the Treasury, from the Minister of Finance. In fact, I see it as a supplementary budget without ex-ante parliamentary approval. And my hunch is that I think we are likely to continue on this road, especially for this year. You saw in the midterm budget review, the minister did not actually ask for a supplementary budget. And it's actually highly likely that before the year ends, most ministries are going to run out of their votes, so which may then necessitate this kind of unallocated reserve transfers.
But Prosper, let me jump in there. I mean, it appears though, and I think Vincent said this, if you look at 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and now 2019, it appears the same underlying issues are there, and it looks like nothing is really being done to fix those. And Judah said this, corporate governance issues, lack of accountability, and so on.
That's the challenge, and that's the perception from citizens. And the irony is that we have the proper institutional framework, the proper legal framework in place, but I think where we are having challenges is with respect to adhering to the provisions of the institutional and legal framework that's there in place. So I think it's a challenge that we need to really address quite holistically, quite comprehensively, and quite urgently.
Right. Vincent, I want to focus on local authorities, particularly the sections in the OAG's report that highlighted anomalies in government ministries, departments, local authorities and parastatals. Now, here exceptions were noted, for example, in the allocation of devolution funds and a general lack of financial management. Again, Vincent, I mean, this does have an impact, I believe, on citizens, particularly when it comes to social and economic justice. What would be your comment to some of these alleged financial misdeeds? Vincent? Sorry, Vincent, your sound is very poor. Hello? All right, Vincent, we'll come back to you. I think we'll have to work on fixing your sound. Judith, let me bring you in here. Yeah, sorry, Vincent, if you could mute your microphone while we try and sort out your sound. It's very hard to, we can't really hear you. Judith, the OAG's report was very particular in pointing out specific irregularities in line ministries that are responsible for overseeing such sectors as health, education, and social protection. What is your opinion? What were the overriding issues that allowed such practices to be carried out at all?
NC, I think my esteemed panelists have already been highlighted that these irregularities that we are hearing of in this report, we are not hearing them for the first time. The 2018 report was very loud on similar irregularities, and it also made very clear recommendations. Unfortunately, most of it fell on deaf ears. And in my opinion, it's precisely because there are no penalties for the culprits that are highlighted in that report. The Auditor General was very precise by pointing out that within the 2018 report, she made 356 recommendations across line ministries, local authorities, and parastatals. But only 94 of those recommendations were implemented. 88 were partially implemented, and 174 were not implemented at all. And it just points to poor governance systems. There are no checks and balances within all those, with these institutions, and adherence to and prioritization to implementation is weak, just because there are no penalties. I think in between the audit reports, before we see the 2020 or 2021 reports, there need to be follow-up mechanisms to push for the implementation. So we don't wait to the end and come back and say, oh, the same thing is recurring. So there's no indication of any political willingness to address, because only a few people are benefiting from the malpractices that are happening, prejudicing the majority of the citizens. So really, there need to be stiffer penalties for the culprits, in my view.
Thank you. Pepukai, I'm just going to repeat there what Judith actually said. It is reported that the 2019 OAG report reveals that out of the 356 recommendations made by the OAG in 2019, only 94 or 26% were fully implemented. 88 or 25% were partially implemented, and 174 or 49% were not implemented at all. The same trend can be witnessed from the 435 recommendations made in 2017. So, Pepukai, what is the process once the OAG's report is received by Parliament? What are the next steps? And how does Parliament ensure that all exceptions without fail are remedied and action taken against legally proven wayward individuals, parastatals, or even ministries?
Thank you, Andy. Perhaps let me highlight the process by which the Auditor General produces these reports. First, when they approach an auditee, maybe a ministry, department, or agency, they check all these issues and they highlight these issues to the auditee, who are then given an opportunity to respond to these issues. And when they respond, it is part of the package that we get from the Auditor General is the response from the auditee. So we start from the responses by the auditees themselves. Some of the responses are very inadequate, and we have some ministries who have given responses, who have not given even responses to the issues that were highlighted. If you check in the Auditor General report, for example, there are some ministries which didn't respond to some of the issues. Then some of the responses are unconvincing. For example, you check on the issue of the excess expenditure that my colleagues have spoken about. The response given there was it is because of unforeseen adjustments in salaries. But we are in an inflationary environment. It is given fact that by half year you realize that we are likely to exceed the expenditure on salaries. So you just need to come up with a supplementary budget. Then for some of the issues, the ministries did not provide the evidence of implementation. And that's why the Auditor General continues to raise these issues.
So Pepukai, thank you for highlighting some of these issues. But then, I suppose, what do you as Parliament do about it now? Because we can't have Parliament being toothless in the face of ministries, parastatals, local authorities not actually fixing some of these exceptions in the OAG's report, going far back as 2015 even.
Yes, thank you, Andy. What then happens is when the Auditor General report is tabled in Parliament, the public accounts, it is then referred to the Public Accounts Committee, who are then supposed to look at these issues. And if they are in support of the recommendations of the Auditor General, they do so. But if they have their own additional recommendations, then they produce reports which are then tabled in Parliament, and the executive, through the Minister of Finance, is expected to respond to these recommendations through a document we call Treasury Minute, which is sort of a response to the recommendations of the Auditor General or the Public Accounts Committee, where they are making promises that we have noted these recommendations and we are going to do 1, 2, 3 in terms of implementing the Auditor General recommendations. And all committees of Parliament, they are supposed to monitor implementation of these recommendations through the reports that they receive monthly, quarterly, and annually. Was as part of the information contained in those reports, it's also to do with implementation of Auditor General recommendations. Although we have not been receiving much of that information in the reports and much of the Treasury minutes.
So, Pepukai, can I then say with confidence that your office, particularly the Budget Office in Parliament, will be on top of this issue and make sure, I hope, that the exceptions highlighted in the OAG's report through the various committees, are monitored and resolved? Because, if you look at any private entity, any company that's audited, they expect you to fix those audit exceptions. It appears as if government or different departments, parastatals, local authorities and ministries can willy-nilly ignore some of these exceptions and not do anything about them. So can you assure us that Parliament is on top of this and is going to make sure, particularly with reference to the 2019 report, that these exceptions are fixed?
Yes, indeed. I can confidently say that we have developed guidelines on submission of Treasury minutes, which are supposed to be submitted within 20 days after a report is tabled in Parliament. And as the Budget Office, we are also assisting committees every month when they receive these implementation reports to highlight some of these issues. We're comparing with what is in the Auditor General report versus what the Ministry reported, highlighting deficiencies in terms of implementation of the Auditor General recommendations. However, for some of the issues that are beyond the ministries, then we highlight to the committees of Parliament who is then supposed to implement those recommendations. Well, some of the recommendations have to do with the capacity issues within ministries to implement, and some of the recommendations have to do with the need for regular monitoring of these committees. But there are some which border on lack of interest by the MDAs to implement these recommendations. So we highlight these issues to the committees of parliament.
Well, don't worry, Pepper Kai. I'm sure in future programs we'll check with you the progress that your office and the parliament has made in looking at these exceptions. Vincent, I hope you're back with us, because I do have a question which I'd like you to answer briefly. Vincent, are you there? All right, we'll try and get Vincent back. You're watching our virtual discussion this afternoon. ZIMCODD Public Finance Management Reform Indaba. Implications of the 2019 Office of the Auditor General OAG's findings on social and economic justice. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Paper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Prosper, let me come to you. You know, let me ask you your comment in terms of actions that should be taken. I mean, you heard Pepper Kai there, you heard him give us live on air here on ZTN his promise that the Budget Office is on top of this and they're going to be working hand in glove with the various committees. But I mean, your opinion, you know, I mean, how now can we raise awareness of citizens to participate in this process of monitoring public finance spending? You know, what are your recommendations? And also, how can government ensure that the audit exceptions, as highlighted in OAG's report, are acted upon? And of course, more importantly, as we mentioned earlier, don't reoccur over and over again? I mean, you heard Pepper Kai. What are your comments to that?
Thanks, Andy. I think firstly, with respect to issues of citizen awareness and participation, obviously programs like this one that we are having, I think goes a long way in terms of supporting that. But there's also, I think, room for civil society organizations, trade unions, and even other non-state actors and NGOs also contribute towards ensuring there's interest, there's participation and awareness in reports such as the OAG's report. So I think there's a lot that can be done by non-state actors in terms of supporting citizen awareness and participation. Then in terms of what can be done to address some of these issues, I think ultimately it's really about coming up with the right kind of incentives as well as disincentives to induce the right kind of behaviors. I've already mentioned that we have a very strong institutional and legal framework that seeks to address some of the issues. But I think where we are facing challenges is with respect to implementation. Let me give the example of the new the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, which is there, and it's quite a progressive piece of legislation, but it hasn't been fully adopted and implemented by para-state house and state-owned enterprises. So I think for me, we need to come up with the right kind of disincentive, the right kind of carrots and sticks to ensure that state institutions actually account for every cent, for every dollar of public resources that they are exercising stewardship over. So we need those strong disincentives to punish wrong behavior and also to encourage good behavior. Some of the small progress that we've actually been seeing, I think it needs to be encouraged, and other institutions also need to learn and get motivated and inspired by the limited progress that we've seen. I think I must state that yes, there's been progress, but I think there's still a long way that needs to be done,
right,
that at least we will enhance governance and transparency and accountability.
Thanks, Prosper. Vincent, I think you're back with us now. Are you there, Vincent? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, Andy.
All right, perfect. Vincent, because you've been off, I'm going to ask you two questions. So please make a note of them. The first one, I want to focus on local authorities. And here, of course, exceptions were noted in the allocation of devolution funds and also a general lack of financial management across most of the municipalities in Zimbabwe. So the first question is, what is the impact, you believe, of that type of alleged financial misdeeds on citizens, Zimbabwean citizens? And my second question, Vincent, to you is, What do you hope to see now? We've all now read the 2019 OAG's report. What do you hope to see happen? What action do you believe should be taken by whom? And what would be your recommendations going forward to ensure that the alleged misconduct as highlighted in the OAG's report is not repeated in future and that social and economic justice for citizens is not compromised?
Okay, thank you so much, Andy, for those questions. Unfortunately, my network has been poor. My point on local authorities, there are actually many issues that were raised against local authorities. One, failure to reconcile devolution funds. You find the devolution funds are actually coming from Section 301 of the Constitution, where there's an undertaking that not less than 5% of the collections of treasury in any financial year must be given to local authorities, provincial and metropolitan councils as their share in that year. What is the purpose of this fund? The major purpose of this fund is to address vertical and horizontal fiscal imbalances emanating from the view that the collection levels at local government levels are generally weak to the extent that they need the support of the national government in order for them to provide the services at a comparably fair tax levels. We are trying to ensure that people in Gwanda can access water, clean water, the same as people in Harare, the same as people in Gokwe. But where we have local authorities failing to reconcile these devolution funds, it means then we cannot get a comprehensive explanation in terms of how these devolution funds were used.
So Vincent, let me jump in there. Apologies, we are running out of time, but I'd like to then, I understand what you're saying and they're very valid points, but I'd like to know, what do you think now? What's the way forward? What would you recommend? How can we make sure that the OAG's report and the exceptions highlighted in it are resolved, managed, and don't reoccur going forward?
Okay, thank you so much for that. I have a number of things that I think can be done in order to ensure that we improve the implementation of the Auditor General's recommendations. One, we must begin to look at capacities in local authorities to implement those recommendations. So in as much as we are expecting to see the recommendations implemented, but we must ask ourselves a question. Are there capacities to implement the recommendation? So we need to conduct capacities to implement local authorities that were cited for lacking risk management policies. Gweru City Council is one such local authority, and that is a serious problem. So my immediate recommendation is that we need now to look at how best we can bring these policies and systems in local authorities such that all the various areas of risks are properly managed by local authorities. Then thirdly, there's a challenge with records management. For example, at Masvingo City Council, that it really needs to be addressed. What was they cannot be identified earlier on. We must also begin to look seriously into issues of penalties. Like you agree with me that where bad behavior is not being punished, then there are no incentives for being good. So we must work on punishing bad behavior and incentivizing good behavior in order to get a positive return at the end of the day. Then lastly, we must also look at the internal systems of governance, particularly the internal audit systems. Like you would ask a question, what governance problems, systems, failure to comply with legislation and international best practice is only identified by the external auditor or by the Auditor General, wherein we have a resident internal auditor and an audit committee for local authorities. So I think we must work on incapacitating the internal audit systems and in some cases reconsidering the lines of accountability of these internal audit systems.
Right, thank you, Vincent. We only have a few minutes left, but I do want to ask Pepukai and finally Judith two final questions, but please, if you could be as brief as possible, because we have about 4 minutes left. Pepukai, I suppose, what is Parliament going to do to hold the executive or the government accountable in ensuring that the OAG report is taken seriously and prompt action is taken against identified and proven misconduct? I mean, Pepukai, does Parliament really have the legal and legislative teeth, so to speak, to make any meaningful changes to improve the adverse reports received year in and year out?
Thank you, Andy, for that question. The teeth is there, the legislative, the legal framework is there, although there is need for maybe an improvement in terms of that legal framework, but the teeth is there. But what we expect also is the adequacy of resources for the ministry, department, agencies, and local authorities to budget towards upgrading even their systems so that they are able to implement these recommendations. But as far as Parliament is concerned, or the Auditor General is concerned, the teeth is there, but there's need for an improvement, especially on the part of the Auditor General, so that she is given some powers, perhaps, and also some of the issues be referred to the National Process Execution Authority, and we want that contained in the new public finance management
just
bill.
very briefly. I mean, every year it appears the Auditor General is taken to court by some of the people who are mentioned in the audit report. And that seems very strange, particularly if you look at it from a business perspective. So it's almost as if people are trying to possibly scare her or scare the Auditor General to not really mention them or put pressure on her. And that doesn't seem, commentators believe that shouldn't be right, and she should have those teeth that you talked about.
Yeah, that's why we said it should be codified in law. Once it's codified in law, then she won't be taken to court. But at the present moment, the Audit Office Act is weak, and there are no deterrent sanctions for errant behavior. So we need those sanctions, especially in the Public Finance Management Act, Section 92, to be deterrent enough so that people cannot act wayward.
Thanks. All right, Pepekai, apologies. I have to jump in there. Judith, I'm sorry, we are coming to the end of the show, so I can give you a minute or so just to have a quick chat. I want your recommendations, because we talk here about raising awareness among citizens to get involved in public finance management issues. So obviously, I'd like your recommendations very briefly, of course, on how that can be done. And also, what's the way forward? I mean, you have mentioned sanctions. You've mentioned it a couple of times. But I mean, apart from that, what really can be done, or what should be done to make sure that these exceptions are managed and that money spent, our money spent on these projects and government projects are spent on the right things? Judith, very briefly, please.
Did you get to me?
Yeah, very briefly. Please go ahead. Judith, did you hear me? Hello, Judith?
Sorry, and come again. I didn't hear you.
I asked you, I said to you if you could be very brief, because
Yes,
we are coming to the end of the show. It's a two-part question. How can we raise public awareness of citizens to get involved in public finance management issues? And also, outside of sanctions, what do you think is the way forward? What would you recommend? And I have to ask you to be brief, because we are coming to the end of the show.
Thank you, Andy. I think the issue of transparency that has been raised is a key issue, because transparency is a citizen's best friend. But I think right now ministries and local authorities can get away with murder because there is no access to the budget. Citizens have no access to the budgets that these ministries do have. So I think the role of technology in combating corruption should be given prominence. For example, government should adopt e-governance as a way of putting those ministries' finances for public to see. But however, linking this to what I already mentioned about the ability of citizens to call out those malpractices without repressive laws being put on them is also important. So I think it is also important to have innovations that increase transparency. For example, by improving access to information, by linking existing systems together and using analytics to identify red flags. And I'm sure Professor Murwira and his innovation hubs will come in handy here to try and provide those innovations.
Right, Judith, unfortunately, I have to jump in there. We have come to the end of our program this afternoon. I'd like to thank my guest. That's Judith Cowlam, Executive Director, Poverty Reduction Forum Trust; Pepekai Chivore, Director in the Parliament of Zimbabwe's Budget Office; Dr. Vincent Chakunda, Senior Lecturer, Local Governance Studies, Midland State University, MSU; and last but not least, Dr. Prosper Chitambara, Senior Economist at Ledgers. I'd like to thank you all for giving us your time and appearing on the program this afternoon. You've been watching our virtual discussion, ZIMCODD Public Finance Management Reform Indaba, implications of the 2019 Office of the Auditor General OAG's findings on social and economic justice. This broadcast was brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Now a final comment. Zimbabwe's public finance management is characterized, it is alleged, by perennial challenges, including misappropriation of public funds, financial irregularities, unreconciled and unaccounted expenditure, and in general, lack of value for money. It is acknowledged, however, by commentators that some progress has been made by the government in this area over the last 3 years. But the mismanagement of public finances has both monetary and non-monetary implications, including revenue loss and deteriorating public service delivery. Critics state that more effort and work needs to be put into improving the state of public service delivery in Zimbabwe. They say that this is evident both in rural and urban areas. At a national level, lack of meaningful spending on infrastructure over the last 10 years has taken its toll. The Zimbabwe government understands and itself states that more funds need to be spent on social programs that benefit citizens. Critical issues must be prioritized and quickly attended to so that social and economic justice can be attained by all. I'm Andy Hodges, and that's it from me this afternoon. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.